Hey guys, have you ever wondered what medieval romance really looked like once the courtship songs faded and the torches went out? Picture a world where personal hygiene was a myth, superstitions ruled the bedroom, and the notion of privacy was as foreign as a hot shower. Imagine that, then brace yourselves for a plunge into some of the weirdest, most eyebrow-raising sexual practices of the Middle Ages, where love, lust, and lunacy collided in equal measure. For the next 10 to 15 seconds, I want you to hold on to your tunics, clutch your codpieces, and prepare for an absurd tour through the bawdiest corners of history. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. Part 1. When bedchambers became battlegrounds of bizarre beliefs. Our journey begins in the grandiose courts of 13th century Europe, where aristocrats believed that the shape of their partner's genitalia could reveal divine messages. Yes, seriously. Back then, the medieval medical text known as the Taquinum Sanitatis declared that if a lady's hymen broke in a particularly red-colored fashion, it signified she had a fiery soul destined for high society. Conversely, a pale or watery discharge was interpreted as a sign of dull temperament and lackluster fertility. Your wedding night was essentially your first, and perhaps most humiliating, job interview. Now, you might imagine this led to some awkward encounters. Knights brandishing candles and potions, midwives squinting under torches trying to assign personality traits based on bodily fluids. Picture Lady Isabella, face flushed, lying there as Aunt Gertrude proclaims, "I detect undertones of melancholy in your, fluids. Best you stick to spinning wool, dear." Talk about a confidence killer. Meanwhile, on the flip side, certain monasteries insisted that sneaking off for some private communion with one's own anatomy was a path to spiritual purification. That's right, self-pleasure was not only condoned, it was encouraged by a few radical thinkers who believed the ecstasy released divine energy, expelling the evil humors that clog the soul. Monks, cloaked in silence and shame, would lock themselves in cellars to explore these practices by candlelight, all in the name of getting holier. Irony much, but if you thought self-service was scandalous, wait until you hear about the so-called trial by bolus. In parts of Germany, a suspect could be cleared of adultery if they could swallow a large lubricated ball of dough, ostensibly a test of, throat prowess, but publicly touted as proof of innocence. Failure meant public humiliation and perhaps a stint in the stocks. Talk about swallowing your pride. Then there were the elaborate fertility rituals. Farmers would dress as goats, reenacting Dionysian rites to ensure a bountiful harvest, and quite explicitly they believed bestial role play would coax the earth itself into fruitfulness. You'll never look at a goat the same way again. As if that weren't enough, medieval Europe was a melting pot of customs in the round. In certain alpine villages, youths played night birds, where young men and women would wander snowy fields disguised with bird masks. If your feathered friends happened upon each other, they were obliged to strip away the mask, and more, under penalty of public shaming. Love at first flight? More like frozen mortification under a full moon. Interwoven through all of this was the ever-present church doctrine. Clergy preached that the male orgasm had to be strictly utilitarian. Be fruitful and multiply. Yes, but only under strict guidance and preferably in the missionary position. Deviations, like sideways antics or playful acrobatics, were denounced as devilish distractions. Yet, rumor has it some bishops kept secret manuals detailing the very abominations they publicly condemned. Hypocrisy? Absolutely. That attention to detail meant walls in some castles were actually painted with instructional frescoes. No, not depicting knights slaying dragons, but rather demonstrating step by step how to achieve true alignment of the humors during conjugal congress. Historians speculate these frescoes doubled as both prescriptive art and perhaps early instructional porn, only slightly less censored. Finally, we can't ignore the curious case of the so-called white marriage treaties in medieval France. Aristocratic families, desperate to secure political alliances without the messy business of heirs, would sign pacts promising bed but no bedding. Couples were wed, lived together under the same roof, but were religiously forbidden to consummate the union. The result? secret liaisons, coded letters, and perhaps one of the earliest forms of the friends with benefits concept, albeit with a lot more secrecy and a lot less Netflix. As we can see, the medieval bedroom was an unpredictable realm, part medical lab, part spiritual sanctuary, part political theater, and part freak show. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. In part 2, we'll wander into the shadowy forests of Scandinavia to witness fertility festivals involving, well, let's just say you'll want waterproof cloaks. Stay tuned because medieval sexual absurdity is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more eyebrow-raising, tear-inducing tales of lust, lunacy, and survival. In the frostbitten reaches of 12th century Scandinavia, wild fertility festivals transformed sleepy hamlets into bawdy arenas, where the line between pagan rite and public indecency blurred faster than you could say, "Run for your reindeer." Picture this. Under the pale glow of the midnight sun, young men and women donned crude bird masks in homage to the Norse god Freyr, patron of virility, and flitted through snowdrifts like drunken cranes. Their mission? To capture a partner in a ritual flight of desire, which meant the lucky or unlucky pair would be bound together until they'd consummated their union under the scrutiny of revelers, armed with torches and tankards of mead. There was no running from love in these parts, only stumbling, perhaps on an icicle, into the arms of your intended. As the ceremony intensified, it wasn't unusual for participants to smear ritual oils made from fermented berries and animal fats, an act thought to heighten sensation and ignite the spark of life in one's nether regions. Imagine the olfactory horror. Half-thawed boar fat mingling with mashed lingonberries all over your limbs as you tried to seduce your partner without slipping into a snowbank. It was like an alpine luge, except the prize at the finish line was very different. Once the masks came off, often moments after the first frigid thrust, villagers would inspect the birds of the night for omens. If a feather fell from a maiden's mask, it was taken as a sign she'd soon be pregnant and household goods should be prepared. If a mask cracked open, that couple was fated to be cursed with endless bickering and cold feet, quite literally. Some elders claimed they could divine the success of a harvest simply by the color of goose grease left on a lover's thigh. And yes, they would hold court about it on Monday mornings, while packing fermented fish for lunch. Meanwhile, south of the Baltic, German peasants practiced an equally absurd custom known as the Veil of Venus. Newlyweds were presented with a heavy linen sheet perforated with dozens of holes, each hole representing a month of the year. On the bride's first night, she was blindfolded and guided to the bed by her groom, who had to thread his manhood through the correct hole for that month. A misalignment was considered a grave insult to the goddesses of fertility and might condemn the couple to a year of barrenness or petty domestic disputes. You can imagine how secretive they kept that sheet stash, both for privacy and because the thing probably smelled like mildewed linen and broken promises. But the weirdness didn't end at masks and sheets. In parts of medieval France, noble women commissioned tiny, exquisitely carved wooden phalli, often painted in bright reds and greens as tokens of affection. These love wands were sometimes dipped in sweet oils or honey before clandestine use, leading to more than a few sticky scandals in royal courts. Poets of the day penned sonnets to these carvings, comparing their craftsmanship to the finest courtly art. One anonymous troubadour even mused that no tapestry woven in Arras captures the shape divine like the maple love pillar pressed to my lady's ear. High praise for a piece of wood, but hey, medieval marketing at its finest. In the chaotic borderlands of the Holy Roman Empire, itinerant peddlers sold aphrodisiac amulets made from the bones of executed criminals. Legend held that ingesting powder from the femur of a beheaded traitor would imbue the consumer with unparalleled virility, although, ironically, most who dared try it suffered severe stomach cramps and perhaps the divine irony of a failing. Performance. Medieval ad copy boasted, "One crushed tibia augments desire thricefold," but reviews were mixed when victims couldn't rise to the occasion. Ouch! Venturing into the Iberian Peninsula, we find Moorish Andalusia, where bathhouses served as the epicenter of both hygiene and hedonism. Private alcoves in the hammams featured reclining marble couches warmed by heated floors, where patrons, both men and women, could partake in sweet-scented oils and scented candles imported from Damascus. Yet beneath the steamy serenity lurked clandestine erotic scribes who read sensual poems aloud while the couples enjoyed mutual massages. The sound of whispered verses, punctuated by the drip of heated water, created an ambiance that modern spa brochures would kill for. Keep in mind, though, that the most daring souls sometimes found themselves arrested by the moral police, mutasib, who patrolled the baths looking for evidence of illicit behavior. Imagine being dragged, naked and oil-slathered, into the street at dawn. That's a morning you'll never forget. Meanwhile, the English countryside played host to the curious practice of kissing weddings. During these gatherings, ostensibly communal ceremonies to celebrate spring, participants blindly kissed strangers buried beneath blankets of flowers. The rule was simple: find your match by feel and taste alone, then unmask at the end to see if Cupid truly knew best. Of course, with everyone soaked in rose water, lavender oil, and the occasional whiff of wet dog from last night's barn dance, it was hard to tell one lip from another. Mystery dates were fun until someone ended up smooching the vicar's goose, but such was the gamble of love in medieval yeomanry. At university towns like Paris and Bologna, the ivory towers of learning also housed secret circles of pleasure scholars. These debauched students of Arabo-Latin erotic treatises would slip off to candlelit chambers, armed with manuscripts, describing exotic positions supposedly gleaned from the Far East. They attempted acrobatic maneuvers, often requiring two assistants to hold the scholar aloft while his partner performed a balancing act, all to replicate the fabled Lotus of Canton. Spoiler alert, most ended up in bruised heaps on the floor, clutching a torn page that proclaimed, "This posture bestows the wisdom of 1,000 scholars." Instead, they gained the wisdom to avoid scholastic positions ever again. To top it all off, even the aristocracy had bizarre plumbing issues that affected their sex lives. In some opulent French chateau, conjugal closets were equipped with early bidets, stone basins with spigots designed to rinse away the evidence of passion. Yet many servants rigged these soapy streams to spray at odd angles, turning a moment of intimate cleanup into an impromptu water fight. Ladies and lords would shriek as cold water jabbed them in sensitive areas before ordering their chambermaids to fix the blasted contraption. A dash of slapstick to an otherwise solemn duty. By the end of these northern and western escapades, one truth emerges: medieval sexuality was equal parts creativity, superstition, and sheer slapdash improvisation. Whether you were slipping through veils to prove your worth, swallowing criminal bone for prowess, or fending off water jets mid-audition, the past was anything but prudish. Stay tuned for part 3, where we'll cross continents into the Middle East and delve into tales of Genji lamps, eunuch intrigue, and forbidden harems that would make a travel ban look like a polite suggestion. The nightmare of history marches on. By the time our weary caravan trudged into the jeweled courts of the 14th century Middle East, we realized medieval sexuality had leveled up from bird masks and dough balls to an entire underground economy of lust, complete with Genji lamps, eunuch, espionage, and harems so secretive they made Area 51 look like an open house. Our story opens in a shadowed alcove of Topkapi Palace, where a trio of palace artisans gathered to unveil their latest masterpiece, the Genji lamp. Supposedly inspired by those legendary lamps of Arabian Nights lore, this contraption was a glass vessel filled with perfumed oils and suspended over a flame. But here's the twist. The lamp's inner wick was sheathed in ribbons of silk attached to a hidden pulley mechanism. When a nobleman grasped the lamp's base and gave it a discreet jiggle, the silk ribbons would spiral upward, causing colored oils to swirl and refract candlelight through kaleidoscopic patterns, an optical aphrodisiac if ever there was one. One courtesan swore she could tell a suitor's stamina by the speed of the oil's ascent. Another claimed the lamp's glow faintly imprinted erotic shapes onto the chamber walls. Scholars now debate whether these shapes were mere pareidolia, or if artisans really carved symbols smuggled in by Sufi mystics. Either way, it was the height of courtly innovation, and absolutely useless for reading by. Next, we slip into the labyrinthine corridors, patrolled by eunuchs, those hornless sentinels of desire whose very existence straddled the line between tragedy and power. In many Ottoman and Abbasid courts, eunuchs were the ultimate insiders, officially barred from the bedchamber, yet often the ones who chose which concubines earned a sultan's favor. Behind every velvet drape and perfumed curtain, a eunuch stood ready to whisper instructions or sabotage rising rivals. Imagine a clandestine memo scratched into a date palm leaf. "Your Highness, the Circassian girl in Chamber 7 has taken ill. Might I recommend the Nubian slave instead? Her lessons in the ghazal are most inspiring. Thus, a eunuch's pen or stylus was fiercer than any scimitar. In one particularly notorious episode, a eunuch named Jamal grew so jealous of a favored Greek concubine that he reportedly sprinkled her bathwater with a dried powder labeled essence of centaur, a rumored aphrodisiac made from crushed deer antlers and donkey hair. Instead of igniting passion, the concoction caused violent sneezing fits. The Sultan, startled mid-caress by an echoing "achoo," promptly banished Jamal to the kitchen, where he spent the remainder of his days seasoning lamb kebabs and plotting revenge. A cautionary tale, meddle with perfumes at your peril. And then there were the harem keys, literal bundles of gilded passes jingling at a eunuch's hip, each unlocking chambers devoted to a single favorite. Imagine the Sultan in the dead of night, impatient to visit his beloved, only to find the favorite's doorway padlocked because the eunuch was napping on a divan. Legend claims one particularly zealous eunuch would drape his chin over the keys like an overeager chaperone, dozing until the faintest promise of gold tipped him awake again. No wonder the word harem comes from the Arabic haram, meaning forbidden. Sometimes the most forbidden thing was simply getting in. Beyond palace intrigues, erotic literature thrived in manuscript salons scattered from Cairo to Damascus. One celebrated anthology, The Perfumed Garden, detailed positions like the peacock's plume, requiring acrobatic leg lifts and considerable joint flexibility, and The Courtesan's Embrace, which involved interlocking fingers behind the neck, a move rumored to cure melancholia. Copyists often disguise these diagrams as botanical illustrations, so a scholar expecting a treatise on roses instead found delicate sketches of entwined limbs. The moral police occasionally raided these salons, confiscating the manuscripts and arresting the bookbinders, only to release them days later after bribes sweetened by saffron and pistachio halva. Now, if you think that's weird, brace yourself for the notorious Knights of Veils in medieval Baghdad. Once a month, select members of the elite donned the burqa-style veil of silence and gathered in chambers lit only by starlight, filtering through lattice windows. The rule was absolute quiet. Conversation, moans, or even the faintest gasp could result in immediate exile to a desert fortress. The aim? To heighten sensation through sensory deprivation. Each whisper of silk and brush of hair amplified 1,000-fold. Some participants emerged from these nights swearing they'd tasted the Aladdin's own breath on their earlobes, while others simply went mad, babbling about unseen specters and imagining the moon itself had slipped into their shivering embrace. Meanwhile, in the bustling bazaars of Aleppo, cuckoldry turned into a commercial enterprise. Stallholders sold small enchanted mirrors, known as ziyafat mirrors, allegedly forged by alchemists to reveal hidden lovers. If a jealous wife suspected her husband of nocturnal escapades, she placed the mirror under his pillow. The next morning, the mirror would show faint apparitions. A hand here, a foot there, perhaps a rose petal trailing from a lacy kerchief. In reality, of course, the mirror was double glazed to fog up ominously and reflect any candle smoke patterns and eerie shapes. But rumor sold out every shipment before dawn every Friday. Even the pilgrimage routes had their carnal detours. Travelers passing through Mecca and Medina were advised by scribes to carry camel's milk tablets, compressed discs said to restore vitality after arduous rituals. When dissolved in tea, they emitted a heady aroma that supposedly sparked desire in both host and guest. Bedouin guides whispered that some caravans carried secret barrels of this milk, not for sustenance, but to lubricate relations in overcrowded inns. The irony of a holy journey punctuated by lascivious interludes was not lost on the puritanical scholars, who nevertheless wrote guides explaining how to discreetly smuggle said tablets past temple guards. Finally, no exploration of medieval Middle Eastern eroticism would be complete without the story of the Sultan's dagger. This jeweled blade, passed down through generations, was rumored to be inseparable from the Sultan's virility. Before each coronation, the heir would undergo a solemn rite. He and the dagger would spend the night alone in the so-called Chamber of Whispers, where the blade's engraved verse, "Strength of steel, strength of heart," was believed to awaken his dormant potency. Chroniclers claim sultans who skipped this ritual suffered embarrassing bouts of impotence, forcing them to stage public hunts to distract the populace from their private failings. As dawn broke over the minarets, our tour of shadowy harems, oily lamps, and eunuch machinations drew to a close. We leave you amid the swirl of incense smoke and the echo of lute strings, with the knowledge that in this world of silken veils and hidden doors, desire was both a divine gift and a dangerous game. Part 4 awaits in the distant courts of Byzantium and beyond, where clerical edicts clashed with erotic poetry and the church's razor-sharp sermons competed with clandestine pillow talk. Prepare yourselves for the ultimate showdown between piety and pleasure, and remember, in the medieval world, survival often meant knowing when to close your eyes and when to keep them wide open. As our final chapter unfolds within the soaring domes of Byzantium's grand palaces and hushed monastic cells, we find ourselves at the crossroads of sacred ritual and secret desire. Here, clerical edicts thundered from pulpit, and pulpit demanded obedience, even as minstrels' verses and clandestine sonnets wove erotic tales through candlelit corridors. In this world of gilded icons and veiled whispers, the faithful were forced to navigate a perilous tightrope. Salvation or sin, confession or clandestine tryst. Buckle up, dear travelers, for the ultimate collision of ivory towers and silken sheets. Our saga begins with the rise of clerical erotica, a genre so scandalous it emerged from within the church itself. In the late 13th century, a controversial monk named Theodore of Synnada penned the Psalter of Passion, a manuscript that recast the Song of Solomon into bawdy allegory. Christ's embraces became metaphors for lovers' embraces. Lilies and myrrh were not merely flora, but tantalizing euphemisms for anatomy. Theodore insisted his work would draw sinners closer to God by confronting temptation head-on. The manuscript was secretly circulated among abbots, who reportedly read its verses under their cowl shadows, roused by lines like, "Thy petals, O my sweet, caress my petals with the dew of dawn," while the Inquisition would later burn most copies. Rumors persist of hidden fragments tucked into reliquaries across Constantinople. Not far from these monastic intrigues, the imperial court staged an even grander performance, the Festival of the Seven Veils. Empress Irene, famed for her extravagance, commissioned a masque in which 7 dancers, each draped in successive layers of diaphanous silk, performed a slow, hypnotic striptease set to Byzantine chant. As each veil slipped away, a chorus of priests offered psalms and prayers, transforming an unabashedly erotic display into a quasi-sacrament. Guests claimed the juxtaposition of liturgical music and undulating flesh produced an almost holy ecstasy. By night's end, some nobles confessed in trembling whispers that they had experienced visions of angels dancing in the flickering torchlight, though whether these angels resembled cherubim or courtesans remained a topic of heated debate. Meanwhile, deep within the labyrinthine catacombs beneath Hagia Sophia, another tradition thrived, the confessional of shadows. This subterranean confessional booth had no great or proper seating. Instead, penitents knelt upon cold marble steps and spoke into a slit in the rock wall. What they did not know was that on the other side crouched a cadre of leather-clad nuns, members of the secret order of the penitent heart, tasked with transcribing sins onto parchment scrolls. When it came to matters of illicit desire, adultery, masturbation, or impure thoughts, their quills danced with delight. These records were then sealed and smuggled to sympathetic patriarchs, who used them as leverage over wavering bishops or to blackmail wealthy patrons into lavish endowments for church renovations. The very place meant to absolve sin became a den of clerical espionage and erotic documentation. At the same time, Byzantine brokers specialized in relic residuum, minute fragments of saints' bones or hairs, crushed into powders and believed to evoke powerful carnal blessings. One recipe, attributed to a holy woman named Saint Euphemia, instructed women seeking fertility to apply a paste of her ground tibia behind the earlobe before lovemaking. Lovers who ingested the powder were said to experience visions of divine union, though most reported only upset stomachs and a profound sense of guilt. In dusty apothecary shops around Adrianople, jars labeled Sant F's crushed thigh bone for marital bliss gathered cobwebs and ironic glances, a testament to how the sacred and the salacious were perpetually entwined. But if relic powders amused some, the true pièce de resistance in Byzantine erotic fashion was the invention of the embroidered chastity hose. These silk stockings, decorated with delicate golden crosses and small loops, were said to preserve a woman's purity, or at least its appearance. A bride would don them on her wedding night, the garters intricately laced to prevent any unsanctioned disrobing. Grooms, insistent on ensuring the sanctity of the union, were given tiny keys, often fashioned from olive wood, to unlock each garter in sequence. Legend has it that one nervous groom dropped every key into a chamber pot, leading to a frantic midnight scramble that ended with both spouses slipping into giggles and perhaps forgetting the whole chastity gambit. The moral? Even the most elaborate contrivances could not outmaneuver true human curiosity. As courtly and clerical diversions collided, a thriving black market emerged for prohibited texts and objects. The most coveted of these was the Book of Ecstatic Geometry, a treatise that combined erotic poetry with erotic drawings of lovers arranged in sacred mandalas, copied in hidden script upon vellum treated to absorb candle soot. These diagrams were indistinguishable from diagrams of angelic hierarchies until held near a brazier, when the shading revealed intertwined limbs and arching spines. Seekers of the book would meet under the colonnades of the hippodrome, exchanging coded phrases like "I long for the circle of absolution" to arrange clandestine handovers. Possession was punishable by exile, yet demand remained insatiable as high-born nobles and curious clerics alike risked everything for a glimpse of its secret pages. Meanwhile, outdoor carnivals in the suburbs of Constantinople offered a more boisterous union of piety and play. The Feast of St. Theodore saw masked performers enact morality plays by day and bawdy tavern farces by night. In one popular sketch, a repentant whore returns to heaven only to be told by St. Peter that she must first perform one more act of penance involving a pint of mead in a tight barrel stave. The audience roared as she fumbled her costume, ultimately spilling mead on the saint's robe, an intentional comedic jab at clerical pomposity. These street performances were tolerated by authorities as long as the church and state remained satirically intertwined. Mock the sinner, but never mock the sacrament. Yet, for all the spectacle, the true heartbeat of Byzantine sexual eccentricity lay in its poetry salons, gatherings of erudite aristocrats who debated the merits of various erotic epithets. One famous contest pitted the phrase "as soft as the peach's zephyr" against "as swift as the orchid's tremor." Judges, themselves accomplished poets, awarded praise in tiny gold diadems to the most evocative metaphors. Patrons kept notebooks of these epithets, annotating them for future love letters. Some scholars believe that Catherine of Valois, the ill-fated queen of Christendom, carried a tattered collection of these phrases to comfort her during years of widowhood. Even a queen, it seemed, could not resist the allure of sensuous syllables. Finally, our Odyssey draws to its climax within the imperial harem's private gardens, an enclave of cypress trees, marble fountains, and hidden grottos scented with jasmine. Here, the high-born concubines practiced a secret art known as rose divination. At twilight, each lady would pluck a single petal from a white rose and roll it between her fingertips. The number of folds and the petal's coolness against her skin were believed to foretell a suitor's intentions. A supple petal denoted genuine affection, while a brittle one suggested betrayal or fascination with wealth over warmth. Concubines exchanged petal readings with glances and coded coughs, coordinating alliances that could elevate one to the sultan's pillow, or condemn her to scullery drudgery for daring to dream too boldly. As dawn's first light filtered through latticework, our final confession echoes through these marble halls. In Byzantium, as across the medieval world, desire was no mere appetite. It was an alchemical force, transmuting clay-like humans into instruments of ecstasy or instruments of penance. From clerical scholars scripting erotic allegories to concubines decoding rose petals, every act of intimacy carried the weight of heaven and hell. No wonder poets wrote of love as both sin and salvation. In those days, pleasure was the knife's edge upon which souls trembled. And so we leave you amid the clatter of amber beads and the whisper of silken drapes, with the knowledge that medieval sexuality was a tapestry woven from threads of faith, folly, and feral invention. Whether you found yourself appalled, amused, or downright aroused, remember this: the past is not a distant echo but a carnival of the impossible made flesh. Thank you for joining this sardonic pilgrimage into humanity's most intimate absurdities. May your own nights be far less complicated and far more consensual. Hey guys, have you ever wondered what it was like to slip between the reed mats of a grand Aztec palace, your heart pounding as temple drums echo in the distance? Picture yourself in a world where bedchambers hid more ritual than romance, and every sigh could summon gods or damn you to ritual shame. Brace yourselves for a dive into the bizarre bedroom rituals of the Aztecs, where love, lust, and lunacy mingled like cacao and chilies in a potion of pure absurdity. Part 1. Cupid or Chaos. Among the cacao trees, our tale opens not in some perfumed boudoir, but in the open-air cacao groves that fringe Tenochtitlan's grand causeways. Young lovers seeking Aztec-approved intimacy first had to pass the cacao courtship ceremony. No whispers beneath moonlit walls here. Suitors carried heavy gourds of frothy spiced chocolate up temple steps while serenading their beloved with flute melodies. If the maiden accepted the gourd without flinching at the chili pepper burn, the matchmaker, usually her aunt or grandaunt, declared the union sanctioned by Xochiquetzal, goddess of love and fertility. Rejecting the gourd, however, meant public mockery and a swift dash of ground chili in the face, a spicy humiliation broadcast across the plaza. Once betrothed, the couple faced the notorious blood-binding bed. In a small chamber scented with copal incense, the bride would prick her earlobe with an obsidian awl, letting a single droplet of blood fall onto the groom's wrist. He then traced it in a spiral across her palm before pressing his thumb into the same drop. This blood pact was believed to merge their life forces forever. The problem? Obsidian awls weren't exactly surgical instruments. Many brides emerged from this ritual clutching their ear, wincing while tiny splinters of volcanic glass glittered in their hair like malevolent confetti. Romantic? Depends on your pain threshold. Next came the couple's first night in the Hall of Whispers, a windowless chamber lined with reed mats and carved wooden masks of past lovers. The masks served two purposes: to channel ancestral blessings and to ensure privacy, because the Aztecs believed even gods could eavesdrop. Legend tells of a noble princess who, unnerved by the idea of a deity backstage, placed chili-infused petals beneath her mat. When Quetzal-breasted masks began leaking droplets of scented oil, a sign the gods were listening. Her husband leapt up sneezing so violently he knocked over a sacred incense burner, nearly setting his tunic ablaze. Divine blessings, it seems, came with serious fire risk, but the truly peculiar came at dawn. Before exchanging vows to remain bound as maize kernels in a pod, couples performed the feathered awakening. The bride lay face down while the groom, armed with a bundle of eagle down, tickled her back from shoulders to waist, an exercise meant to stoke passion by tickling the spine's whispering nerves. A single stray feather could send the bride into spasms of uncontrollable laughter, leading to broken reeds or even dislocated ribs in extreme cases. Yet this was considered an auspicious sign. If she laughed before sunrise, their marriage would prosper like a well-watered field. Meanwhile, high-ranking nobles indulged in an extra layer of ritual, the mirror of truth. A polished obsidian mirror, freshly carved by temple artisans, was held before the couple's naked bodies. The reflection, dim and wavering, was said to reveal hidden faults. A crooked spine signaled dishonesty. A scarred shoulder hinted at lustful secrets. Should the mirror's sheen obscure any part of their flesh, priests declared that one partner harbored secret infidelity or a fragmented soul. To counter this, the accused underwent a cleansing cacao bath, where attendants smeared them head to toe in sacred chocolate paste and scrubbed vigorously with maguey thorn brushes. It was less of a spa day and more of a scrub brush boot camp, meant to purge both body and reputation. For those not born into nobility, bedroom rites grew even odder. Commoner couples performed the stargazer's embrace on temple rooftops, lying side by side on carved stone slabs at midnight. Each clasp of hands was counted by a nearby guardian priest, who recited chants invoking Tlaloc, god of rain, to bless the union with fertility. But rain gods being notoriously fickle, many couples found themselves drenched by sudden downpours or scorched by unexpected sunbursts at sunset. Proof, the priests insisted, that the gods were testing their resilience. And then, just when you thought Aztec rituals reached their zenith of absurdity, we arrive at the trial by Quetzal feather. If a couple quarreled during their honeymoon, the offended spouse could demand a trial. Both parties knelt before a council of kin, each wearing a headdress adorned with quetzal feathers tied to their loincloths. The challenger then attempted to pluck a feather from the other without being pricked by the hidden obsidian needles laced among them. Success meant the challenger's grievance was validated. Failure condemned them to an extra hour of chastity. No reed mat or hall of whispers allowed, under penalty of family ostracism. Imagine bickering your way into a week-long dry spell because you couldn't outpick at a peacock's cousin. By now, we've only scratched the surface of Aztec intimacy, and believe me, the next chapters get even wilder. In part 2, we'll journey into the floating gardens of Tenochtitlan to uncover fertility floats, ritual dances that doubled as bedroom workshops, and the risque practice of blood-scented perfume that could ignite passion or madness. Stick around, because surviving these ancient customs required more than courage. It demanded a sense of humor sharper than obsidian itself. Deep within the watery heart of Tenochtitlan, where chinampas, those ingenious floating gardens, stretched like emerald rafts across the lake, Aztec lovers took intimacy to dizzying new heights. Forget drawing back curtains. Here, romance unfurled atop reed-bound platforms, drifting amid maize stalks and all-in lilies. Suitors carved miniature canoes from fragrant cypress and laden them with gifts, obsidian mirrors, jade beads, and cocoa beans, then paddled through moonlit waterways to meet their beloved at a secret rendezvous beneath swaying papyrus. Imagine the thrill of balancing on a bobbing bed of woven reeds as the night air thickens with pollen and the whisper of temple drums echoes across the water. Once the pair met aboard these floating stages, the real performance began. It was called the Dance of the Water Nymphs, though no actual nymphs were involved. Just a pair of earnest young lovers guided by an elderly priestess in a shell-studded cloak. With each measured step, the priestess dipped a conch shell into the lake, scattering droplets that glimmered like silver coins in torchlight. Those droplets were said to bear the essence of Xalcutlec, goddess of rivers and childbirth, imbuing each touch with the promise of fruitful unions. But staying upright proved nearly impossible. Couples teetered on the reed mats, their laughter mixing with clinking shell bells as they tried to mirror the priestess's graceful footwork. One particularly unfortunate groom took a misstep and pitched headlong into the lagoon, his loincloth trailing like a tattered sail before sympathetic onlookers hauled him out, sputtering and rather damp. These lotus-like liaisons weren't simply for amusement. They served as intimate workshops in beginners' positions, aptly named for elements of the landscape. There was the floating reed, where the couple lay supine on the gardener's platform, limbs entwined with a gently rocking motion meant to mimic the sway of water plants. Legend held that master this movement, and the pair would share a lifetime of harmonious motion in all things, from childbearing to negotiating shared maize rations. Far less serene was the jaguar leap, in which the lover crouched low like a stalking beast before springing upward in a single explosive thrust. Novices, often overcommitted, landing with a thud that rattled ceramic water jugs and sent startled frogs scattering into the gloom. When the dance concluded, couples were anointed with a peculiar elixir, a blend of fermented agave sap, crushed red achiote seeds, and a few drops of menstrual gift collected from the bride's aunt. Yes, you read correctly. Menstruation, far from being taboo, was considered a potent ingredient in fertility rites. A few laborious drops of that crimson fluid were mixed into the perfume, giving it a warm, metallic tang that clung to skin and hair. The scent, priests claimed, awakened latent passions and bound the couple's life forces like vines entwined around a ceiba tree. Modern noses might wince at the notion, but back then, there was nothing more seductive than a whiff of blood-scented perfume lingering in the nostrils. After the aromatic ceremony, the pair were escorted to the greenhouse of secrets, a vaulted chamber built entirely of latticework reed and cane, covered in living vines. Here, flora from every corner of the empire, coffee blossoms from Soconusco, maguey blooms from the highlands, sweet marigold from the Gulf shore, perfumed the humid air. At the center stood a shallow pool fed by gurgling jade spouts. Couples entered barefoot, their feet imprinting patterns in the wet sand, and circled the pool 3 times while a choir of flower-crowned youths chanted hymns to Shalonen, goddess of tender maize. Then, at the chant's crescendo, they surrendered to the embrace of silk bedrolls laid upon flowering mats. The effect was dreamlike, like tumbling into an ocean of petals under a constellation of fireflies. Yet pests abounded, mosquitoes feasted on exposed limbs, tiny chirping crickets scuttled between toes, and once, so the tale goes, a misplaced Quetzal feather triggered a sneezing fit that sent sweet-scented oils flying. But the Aztecs' most elaborate bedroom spectacle lay in the ritual known as the Hymn of the Cacique. Reserved for warriors newly returned from battle, it celebrated both martial valor and erotic conquest. The cacique, chief, selected a concubine from his palace's flower garden, an elite troupe of women trained in song, dance, and lovecraft, and led her to an elevated dais draped in crimson cloth. Trumpeters on adjacent rooftops heralded their approach as the pair ascended to the dais, where musicians struck hollow gourds and struck flint against obsidian to create rhythmic crackles. The cacique donned ceremonial loincloths embroidered with golden suns, while his partner wore a wreath of smoky copal incense and peacock down. Together, they performed the sacred call of the jaguar, a series of rhythmic thrusts and cries designed to mimic the feline's mating ritual. Spectators watched in awed silence, believing the cacique's performance would ensure military success and abundant crops. Some historians argue this spectacle doubled as a means of demonstrating virility to other nobility, because nothing says choose me as your ally like a public display of stamina and theatricality. Not every bedroom ritual was public pageantry. The Aztec home contained its own eccentric practices. Commoner couples built secrets boxes from hollowed gourd shells sealed with beeswax. Inside, they stored talismans of intimacy, tiny clay figures depicting entwined lovers, amulets carved from frog bone, strands of hair exchanged after coitus. Each talisman represented a vow, shared fidelity, mutual respect, or a promise to raise children in the goddess's name. On the next full moon, the box was opened and the contents exposed to moonlight, believed to renew the couple's bond. The problem? Those gourd boxes often attracted ants, which devoured wax seals and, worse, gnawed on the delicate hair strands, leaving couples awoken by faint rumbles of industrious insects feasting on their most intimate keepsakes. Then there was the curious practice of mirror court affection. Mirrors were rare and precious, obsidian blades polished to a dull sheen, so not every home possessed one. But in households that did, couples staged reflection rendezvous at twilight. They would dress in self-wrought masks, usually simple cloth wraps painted with maize yellow stripes, and gaze at each other through the mirror's dark surface before removing masks layer by layer. Peeling off each mask represented shedding deceit, jealousy, or past grievances. The final unmasking, done in the mirror's gleam, signified absolute trust and naked vulnerability. Of course, the low reflectivity meant grimy faces and candle shadows created grotesque distortions that often spooked the uninitiated, leading some unfortunates to flee in terror, masks still in hand. Meanwhile, the midwives and grandmotherly elders held dominion over the birth ritual preparations, a surprisingly lurid precursor to bedroom ceremonies. Expectant married couples were ushered into a chamber lined with amaranth flowers, where the midwife painted the mother's belly with a paste of ground cochineal and maguey syrup. The father, in turn, wore a necklace of sharpened beans that clinked ominously against his chest. This cacophony of bean rattles was believed to ward off evil spirits, though in practice it mostly annoyed the mother and led to her smacking him across the chest in irritation. Lush though the flowers were, the pungent cochineal dye stained linen and skin alike, creating a vivid aura of red that clung to fabrics for weeks, earning the chamber the nickname the Crimson Nest. For the adventurous few, there existed the Quetzal Nectar Challenge. Quetzal birds, revered for their emerald and scarlet plumage, produced a sweet, sticky substance in small secret glands. So rare it was worth its weight in gold. Collecting it was dangerous work. Hunters had to climb towering ceiba trees, risking fatal falls to pluck the small sacs. That nectar, when applied sparingly to erogenous zones, was said to ignite unquenchable desire, though excessive use led to skin irritation and bizarre, dream-inducing hallucinations of flying over maize fields. Some couples reported waking up convinced they were actually Quetzals, calling plaintively from treetops until the sun banished their feathered illusions. As dawn neared over the lake city's gleaming temples, these rituals, some public, some private, some just plain mad, wove together a tapestry of intimacy that blended devotion, artistry, and ritualized pain. From reed floats rocking on moonlit waters to blood-tinged perfumes clinging to sweaty skin, the Aztecs turned the simple act of love into an epic voyage through God's domains. Yet amid all the spectacle, one truth remained constant. In a world where survival demanded resilience and creativity, even the most bizarre bedroom rituals served as both a test of enduring bonds and an invitation to transcend mortal limits. Stay tuned for Part 3, where we'll venture beyond the capital's canals into the highland fortresses and volcanic ridges, uncovering the Aztecs' mountaintop rites involving fire-kissed stones, obsidian mirrors of fate, and a night-long vigil that blurred the line between eroticism and divine madness. The journey is far from over, and the next chapter promises even more absurdity, pain, and surprising glimpses into the heart of an empire built on blood and devotion. High atop the jagged peaks surrounding the Valley of Mexico, where the air shimmers with heat and the world below looks like a living codex, the Aztecs practiced bedroom rituals so extreme they blurred the lines between eroticism, endurance trial, and divine communing. Strap in, because tonight's chapter will test your courage, or at least your tolerance for absurdity. Our ascent begins at the volcanic shrine of Xiuhtecutli, god of fire and renewal. Here, lovers embarked on the searing communion, a rite requiring them to clasp chilled obsidian stones, fresh from the lava flow, between their palms until the edges bit into flesh. Why? The Aztecs believed that by uniting pain and pleasure, the couple purified body and soul, forging a bond as indestructible as volcanic glass. Hands slipped on the razor-sharp surface, drawing thin lines of smoke and blood that curdled in the mountain air. Couples who endured the full 10 minutes were said to emerge with heightened passion. Those who cried out too soon risked public shaming by the temple guards, armed ironically with more obsidian. Next came the echoes of ecstasy, a vigil in the crater rim amphitheater beneath a full moon. Lovers lay upon straw mats arranged in concentric circles, each ring representing a different god's domain: water, wind, earth, and fire. With each hour, a trumpeter atop the highest peak sounded a single note on a hollow reed horn. At the first note, couples would exchange whispered vows. At the second, they would embrace in slow, deliberate caresses. By the third, they experimented with pressure points learned from the herbalists of Chalco, tickling the hips, kneading the thighs, stroking the nape to summon the wind within the body. But it was the fourth hour that tested true metal. Partners would pour warm amaranth honey over each other, turning flesh into gleaming amber, sliding together in erotic stickiness. Benedictions were whispered between breaths. May our union rise like the phoenix from this crater's ashes. Many honestly believed they could taste smoke on their tongues, a boundary-blurring sign they'd communed with the volcano spirit. Meanwhile, lower down the ridge, priests presided over the obsidian oracle, an intimate divination involving the lover's shadow. At noon, when the sun stood highest, a concubine held a polished obsidian mirror above her partner's reclining form. The scribed priests, their faces smudged with charcoal, watched as the lover's silhouette flickered across the glass. Gaps or distortions in the shadow, wedged between obsidian's dark depths, were interpreted as omens of infidelity, hidden desires, or, on rare occasions, divine favor promising 100 grandchildren. To appease negative omens, the couple performed the feather smear reconciliation, painting each other's faces with multicolored bird down dipped in volcanic ash and scented oils. This flamboyant mask was followed by a public dance back down the mountain, arms linked and rooster feathers tied to their ankles, a ritual meant to flock away bad omens. For the truly brave, there was the Night of the Thousand Lanterns, a secret rite reserved for warrior couples or newly appointed nobles. Partners were given 12 miniature clay lamps filled with tallow and strewn with fine red ochre, the color of blood and life. As darkness fell, they positioned the lamps around their sleeping platform in a precise geometric pattern representing the celestial serpent. Each lamp had to burn through the night without waking the bearer. If a flame sputtered out, it was seen as a chastisement. Either passion had waned, or the gods demanded further trial. Couples spent the vigil half asleep, arms entwined, cheeks painted with soot like star maps. Dawn's first light revealed survivors. Those whose lamps still glowed were heralded as blessed and granted special tributes at the next feast. While these mountaintop trials fused endurance and intimacy, everyday Aztec lovers faced grittier routines. In the lowland villages, the maize husk mattress was custom-made by women for their husbands. Strips of dried maize husk were woven into thick layers stuffed inside simple wooden frames. At night, the husband lay upon this mattress, and the wife or concubine would crack fresh ears of corn in her hands, letting the kernels spill onto the husks. That crackling sound was believed to wake the spirits of fertility buried in the maize. The ensuing rustle and squish beneath skin created an unsettling sensation, half tickle, half itch, which only ended when the corn was fully stripped. Those who endured without complaint were said to guarantee a bountiful harvest. Further inland, among the shadowy groves of amate paper trees, existed the papyrus of promises ritual. Couples prepared a long strip of amate bark, chalked with pigments forming a heart-shaped grid. With obsidian styluses, they etched loving vows into each cell, promises of honesty, faith, shared sweat during labor, joyous laughter, and mutual defense against wild beasts, because love in the Aztec world meant facing jaguars as a united front. The paper was then hung between palm fronds in the couple's sleeping chamber. Each morning, they untied one cell's vow to read aloud. The last vow was revealed at dawn on the anniversary of their union. Failure to unbind a vow meant bad luck for the harvest. Success required celebratory feasts featuring ground cacao cakes and fire-roasted turkey. Perhaps the most dramatic domestic rite was the hearth's embrace. In modest homes, couples built small adobe fire pits directly in their sleeping quarters. At nightfall, the hearth was lit, and lovers performed a slow lap around its smoldering circle while chanting the Song of Coals, an incantation asking for enduring warmth in both hearth and heart. Then, on the count of 3, they dove onto the bedroll prepared nearby, their garments still smelling of smoke and ash. The heat of the hearth was believed to fuel the intimacy, but many novices found themselves singed by stray embers or waking in the cold dawn with minimal bedding and a lot of soot between the sheets. All these rites culminated in the pilgrimage of passion, a week-long sojourn undertaken by couples deemed truly devoted. Beginning at Templo Mayor's base, they climbed every step barefoot, carrying baskets of coyote meat and cacao foam. Each night, they camped at a different shrine, dedicating their union anew to rain, wind, sun, and earth. At each stop, they performed a short, intimate rite, sharing a single quail egg, exchanging scented tassels of cut maguey fiber, or whispering secrets into a hollow conch shell for the gods to hear. By journey's end, they arrived at Tlatelolco's market square, weary but bound, where the emperor himself might acknowledge their devotion with a ribbon of quetzal feathers, an honor rarely bestowed. As dawn broke over the smoking volcano horizons, Part 3 draws to a close, lovers tested by fire, water, earth, and spirit, transforming mere bedfellows into elemental partners. In the final installment, we'll descend from the peaks back into Tenochtitlan's heart, revealing the epic Blood Moon Festival, the banquet-turned-bedchamber extravaganza, and the astonishing rites that govern divorce, widowhood, and the rare, but dramatic, rebinding ceremony. Stay with me for the grand finale, where the line between ritual and impropriety shatters like obsidian underfoot. As the final crimson sliver of the moon ascends above Tenochtitlan's azure sky, the city stirs with a fever unmatched even by the grandest warfare. Tonight is the Blood Moon Festival, a mesh of orgiastic pageantry and divine dread where every lover's triumph may become their undoing. Forget whispered promises under reed mats. Here, passion is proclaimed on temple roofs, and survival depends on navigating labyrinthine customs as lethal as a jaguar pounce. Strap in, because our grand finale will leave you cringing, cheering, and wondering why your last Valentine's dinner felt so tame. The evening opens with the Scarlet Procession, a serpentine parade winding from the royal palace to the Templo Mayor's summit. Couples, both nobility and commoners, adorn themselves in robes of dyed spider silk, their garments streaked with crimson pigment made from cochineal and ground cinnabar. Each holds a shallow obsidian bowl, brimming with sacrificial honeyed blood drawn from sacred deer, As they march, priests chant guttural verses invoking Mixcoatl, god of hunting and the stars. At intervals, musicians strike turtle shell drums so thunderous their rhythms seem to crack the very air. The directive is simple: pour a drop of the honeyed blood onto these drums, symbolically feeding the night itself. But the drum's resonance carries every splash across the plaza, so by the time the procession reaches its pinnacle, lovers are wearing streaks of blood and sweat like war trophies, an unflattering but highly photogenic look by any standard. Upon the temple's summit, the blood moon offering demands the ultimate test of devotion. The high priestess, face painted half white and half black, selects pairs at random for the rite of shared sacrifice. With trembling hands, each partner presses their open palms together atop a sharpened obsidian blade embedded in a golden stand. Then, in unison, they draw their palms back, with enough pressure to slice the epidermis, but not so much as to sever tendons. A drop of mingled blood is caught in a leaf of copal, which is then set ablaze and allowed to waft upward in fragrant cinnamon smoke. The priestess interprets the smoke's dance. A spiraling plume means the union is blessed for another year. A drooping wisp signifies underlying resentment that will bloom like black mold. More than one couple has been denounced, banished to the Chinampas to toil alone for a year after their smoke failed to ascend proudly, an exile tantamount to social death. No sooner have the ash-laden embers faded than the banquet boudoir commences in the grand palace's lower corridors. Rows of low stone tables groan beneath platters of fire-roasted turkey, spiced fish stews, and maize cakes frosted with honey and ground amaranth. Yet amid the feast, sumptuous private chambers lie concealed behind tapestry walls, each entry marked by a different symbol, from coiled serpents to hummingbird silhouettes. Guests choose their doorway by casting dyed corn kernels, red for flames of passion, black for shadowed mysteries, yellow for playful teasing. Step through the wrong portal, and you might end up in a chamber of silent anticipation, where only statues of past lovers stand sentinel, their marble eyes unblinking as you squirm, waiting for someone to join you. Step through the right one, and a waiting concubine or concubinary attendant greets you, gown slipping from shoulders, creating a scene part boudoir play, part theatrical farce, because each chamber also contains a pair of masked dancers who improvise. Pantomimes of famous mythic lovers to set the mood. Picture attempting sonorous vows while two masked minstrels reenact the tragic romance of Tlaloc and Chalchiuhtlicue, complete with falling water jugs and thunderous drum rolls. Romance? Perhaps. Comedy? Absolutely. As the banquet boudoir reaches its crescendo, the festival shifts toward its quieter but no less harrowing ceremonies, the rites governing the dissolution and renewal of partnerships. First is the rare but solemn divorce rite of the feathered throne. Historically, only marriages of notable political weight could invoke this procedure. The couple assembles atop a platform draped with red and white plumes, red for their shared blood spilled in passion, white for the purity they now seek apart. With knot-cutting scissors forged from sacrificial knife blades, the husband releases a single white feather into the wind to signify his relinquishment of conjugal rights. The wife frees a red feather to express her release of the bond forged into blood. Both descend the dais to the tolling of a slender bronze chime, each feather's trajectory observed by eagle-eyed priests who interpret the split between feather and fate. A gust that carries one feather higher than the other dictates who must pay the post-nuptial tribute, usually a year's worth of maize tithes. The divorced pair then exits in opposite directions, one toward the jaguar house, the other toward the serpent courtyard, where they must remain until the next blood moon festival, barred from all romantic pursuits lest their old ties corrupt fresh unions. For widows and widowers, there exists the mournful veil of cinders. The bereaved shroud themselves in tunics gray as ash, and endure 3 days and nights of fasting and silent vigil amid smoldering piles of incense and cast-off garments of recently deceased nobles. Each day, they must kneel before a brazier and stir its embers with a golden rod, whispering the name of their departed spouse 300 times, one whisper for each day of the Aztec solar cycle's smallest division. On the final dusk, they cast a lock of hair into the blaze, the resulting flame's color, blue for tranquil acceptance, green for unresolved longing, or black for furious grief, dictates whether they may remarry in the upcoming year, or must endure another cycle of ash and silence. Those who remarry prematurely face the curse of the unwilling, a spectral visit from a ghostly figure who haunts their reed-thatched home until they atone with a ritual apology of cacao-coated loaves. Finally, for the rare hearts that endure trials in return, there is the rebinding ceremony, a culminating ritual meant to restore unions shattered by time or circumstance. It begins at dawn on the first day of the new solar cycle. The reunited couple stands atop a cloth map of their lives. Red threads map their paths to this moment. Blue threads trace the fractures healed. A priestess, her head crowned with amaranth blossoms, weaves a ceremonial belt of braided agave fibers, interlacing tiny jade beads carved into the shapes of hearts, serpents, and maize kernels. As she binds this belt around the couple's waists, unnodding once for memory, twice for forgiveness, thrice for renewed passion, the participants must recite an oath to endure hardship like the mountain peaks, to rejoice in abundance like the Shinampa harvests, and to cherish each other as the gods cherish offerings. If the belt holds through dawn's first breeze, their union is consecrated anew. If it snaps, well, let's just say the gods are not fond of flimsy fibers. As the final knot takes hold, the blood moon festival's crescendo fades into the soft glow of pre-dawn torches. The plaza, once a riot of color and clamor, now echoes only with the distant cries of jaguars and the faint hum of temple bells. Lovers, divorces, and rebonded souls disperse into the waking city, each carrying the scent of incense, the sting of spent rituals, and the silent knowledge that in the heart of the Aztec world, intimacy was never merely physical, but an odyssey, through pain, politics, and poignant absurdity. So as we step back from this theater of desire, where obsidian edges cut skin as readily as they cut lies, where love's flame could both warm and consume, remember that history's strangest bedroom rituals reveal one unchanging truth. Humanity never settles for simple cuddles. We crave spectacle, symbolism, and occasionally a dash of self-inflicted agony for the story it makes. May your own nights require no reed mats or sacrificial honey, and may your hearts beat at human pace, free of feathers and obsidian oracles. Thanks for staying with me through this wild pilgrimage into the Aztec bedroom's mysteries. Now go forth, sleep easy, and perhaps hug your partner a little more gently tonight. Have you ever imagined a world where the man preaching chastity in a silent stone cloister secretly trembles at the touch of a forbidden parchment? Picture cold candlelight flickering on hooded figures whose every whispered prayer hides an aching want, because when you've sworn away fleshly temptation, every stray thought of human warmth becomes a battle for your very soul. Now lean in close, for we're about to embark on a tour through the hidden corridors of medieval monasteries, where sacred vows and secret cravings collided in a symphony of hypocrisy, longing, and absurd survival tactics. Part 1. Behind the cloister walls, the anatomy of a sinful whisper. Under the weight of the tonsured skull and coarse woolen habit, medieval monks carried centuries of doctrine insisting the flesh is a prison for the spirit. Yet the same flesh thumped with urgent needs, an itch no amount of scourging could scratch. It begins at dawn, when the abbey's great bell tolls matins and the brothers trudge from straw pallets to stone floors, feet numbed by the draught seeping through arrow slits. The liturgy demands focus on the divine, but as Brother Anselm recites Deus meus ad te clamavi, his mind wanders to Sister Eloise tending the sick in the infirmary. How her hair, damp with leper's sweat, might smell under heaven's open sky. To combat these treacherous thoughts, the order prescribed mortification of the flesh, iron silices, barbed belts, daily lashings that left the calves festooned with welts. At first, the pain seemed a stern preacher, driving lustful fantasies to the back pew. But soon, sensation became grimly anticipated, a perverse thrill when leather rasped against skin and blood blossomed like inverted flowers. Some brothers kept secret tally marks in their cells, each scar a testament to another night spent wrestling with desire and winning, or so they claimed. Yet extreme discipline invited extreme rebellion. In cloisters across Europe, rumor whispers of the Midnight Manuscript, a folio bound in crimson-dyed vellum and scribbled with erotic psalms in tiny, trembling script, authored by an anonymous scribe known only as Frater Silentium. Its verses promised that the path to divine ecstasy ran through fleshly joy. Monks daring enough to steal into the scriptorium at Vespers found themselves sharing the stolen parchment under flickering lamp oil, each line coaxing laughter, shame, and a something hotter than candle heat behind furrowed brows. The chapter house, meant for solemn counsel and reading of rule, became in some abbeys a trapdoor to temptation. Here, the youngest novices received the lectures. House Saint, Benedict himself counseled moderation, warning quicumque desiderat carnaliter, peccat contra gloriam Dei. Yet when the elder monks recited that line, their eyes darted sideways, gauging who among them bore the flush of recent sin. They'd nod gravely, then slip silent thumbs beneath the habit's hem, an unconscious ritual marking shared guilt and solidarity in suffering. A single catch of eyelash could ignite an entire chain reaction of suppressed glances and clandestine awareness. Food, too, played its part. The strict fasts, bread and water on Wednesdays and Fridays, left starved bodies craving any comfort. Monasteries hid secret cellars with forbidden saltfish, figs shipped from Sicily, and sweet-spiced wines reserved for feasts of saints. A single drop of honey-laden port could loosen the tongue in the habit, leading two brothers to exchange lingering touches over half-hidden flagons. The confessionals, those dark confession boxes echoing with contrition, also served as meeting points, one brother whispering a sin he knew was false. I have gazed upon the flesh of Brother Philip, just to ensure an intimate audience in the damp warmth of a fellow penitent's hand on his own. But perhaps the most outrageous ceremony was the feast of the unbidden guest. Once a year, in the feast of St. John the Evangelist, abbots would stage a mock possession rite. A brother, chosen for his flair and dramatic fainting, would collapse at the refectory entrance, eyes rolling and tongue lolling as if seized by demonic desire. His fellows would gather, chanting verses from the Gospels, then administer a laying on of hands. In reality, the fallen monk wore a hidden belt of burning embers strapped to his waist. Each shift of the rebel's body sent sparks into his habit, and the scent of scorched wool mingled with incense, startling the watchers into fervent prayer and collective goosebumps. The spectacle both reinforced the perils of carnal temptation and provided a rare thrill, like a medieval horror show, breaking the endless cycle of psalms and chores. Yet not all desires were carnal. Some monks yearned for the forbidden knowledge stored in secular libraries. In monasteries perched beside university towns, brothers risked penance to slip into co-ed studies of Aristotelian ethics or Galenic anatomy, thinking understanding the human body might somehow tame its urges. They quizzed young masters in Latin quadrangles, trading scribbled glosses on the margin of scripture for lessons on the genitalia's humors. Their hunger for knowledge, ironically, inflamed the very lust they sought to suppress. As lectures on the cold and moist nature of the phallus led to private experiments with olive oil lubrications in musty abbots' closets, no account of forbidden desires would be complete without mentioning the secret camaraderie of the monastery infirmary. Brothers stricken with gout or dysentery found themselves at the mercy of lay sisters, widows and outcasts who nursed body and spirit. The lines blurred between charitable care and tender seduction. A sister's hand brushing a fevered brow, a damp cloth lauded with dangerous softness against cracked lips. Some infirmaries became crucibles of illicit affection, as lonely sickbeds hosted whispered confessions and shared relief at the warmth of another soul's breath. As dawn approached and the third nocturne bell echoed through the cloisters, the brothers, bodies aching from vigils and debts of pleasure, slipped back to their cells. Padded mattresses, if they were lucky, offered little comfort to bruised ribs or souls heavy with guilt. Yet in that suspended hour between night and prayer, they scribbled final lines in hidden margins, codifying their dreams of escape, fantasies of women outside the stone walls, of summer fields out of chance monotony, or simply of unbroken sleep. Behind Becket's shrine in Canterbury, historians later uncovered fragments of these private reflections. Lines like, "My spirit ascends faster when I taste her hair's salt on my lips than when I taste the Eucharist," testaments to humanity's unquenchable thirst for both the divine and the profane. In many ways, these medieval monks embodied the ultimate paradox, men who saw the body as both temple and tomb, whose greatest transgression was not the act, but the thought of breaking sacred vows. This is only the beginning of our journey into the cloister's hidden corridors. In part 2, we'll unravel the scandalous nun's enchantment, the secret brotherhood who claimed love spells drawn from forbidden Judeo-Christian texts, and the bizarre midnight confabs in the abbot's garden where vows of silence gave way to whispered poetry and stolen kisses under the yew trees. Prepare yourself for more hypocrisy, more heartache, and more self-flagellation than you ever imagined possible. The forbidden desires of medieval monks have only just begun. Have you ever wondered what happens when vows of silence give way to furtive whispers beneath moonlit cloister walls? Imagine furtive trysts in fragrant herb gardens, clandestine love spells scrawled on consecrated parchment, and brothers and sisters of different orders risking scourges and excommunication for a single stolen embrace. Tonight, we slip deeper into the forbidden desires of medieval monks, where devotion and debauchery danced a deadly pas de deux. Part 2, the nun's enchantment and midnight whispers in the abbot's garden. In convents shadowing cathedral spires, a secret sisterhood of nuns, calling themselves the Sororis Umbrarum, or Sisters of the Shadows, hoarded clandestine scrolls of Judeo-Christian incantations. By day, they chanted the divine office in perfect unison. By night, they unrolled vellum beneath candlelight to summon what they called the sacred longing. The incantation required a twig of rosemary, a drop of their own menstrual blood, and the os, secret name of a monk beloved but forbidden. As Sister Lucia whispered the Latin charm, Cor meum ignis, conveni cum amore, the air in the scriptorium grew so heavy with longing that the leaded windows trembled in their frames. Meanwhile, outside these stone refectories, in the moonlit abbot's garden, novices and lay brothers found their own outlet for forbidden yearnings. The garden's famed yew trees, planted to remind monks of mortality, became meeting spots for whispered poetry exchanges and stolen kisses. On midsummer eves, novices would conceal love letters in hollowed mulberries. Each letter bore a concealed patch of musk-scented cloth scraped from a nun's habit sleeve. At midnight, the young brothers crept past sleeping hounds to retrieve these tokens, pressing them to their lips and hearts as though touching the hem of the sacred. One of the monastery's most notorious scandals erupted when Brother Hildebrand, known for his aversion to carnal thought, was discovered kneeling beneath a yew, reciting verses from a stolen psalter rewoven into erotic couplets. His secret passion for Sister Margaret, an infirmarian with a penchant for rosewater, culminated in a midnight rendezvous among the herb beds. Chroniclers later found broken blades of lavender and stains of carmine on the ivy walls, a testament to whispered vows and a single night of fevered exchange before they were caught by the sacristan, who later claimed he smelled the ruin of Eden upon their breath. Even the strictest orders could not stamp out the allure of forbidden touch. The Cistercians, champions of austerity, enforced iron discipline. Monks slept in shifts, turning their flax-filled mattresses to avoid the warm indentations of bodies. Yet rumor tells of an underground Cistercian masquerade held once a decade, when senior monks donned masks of deer hide and entered the novices' infirmary under cover of darkness. There, they shared milk and honey libations with a handful of chosen novices and discussed allegorical interpretations of the Song of Solomon, interpreting the apple tree among the trees of the wood as a thinly veiled euphemism for, well, you know. The affair ended so badly, 2 monks fainted from shame, one burst into uncontrollable laughter, that the abbot ordered the confiscation of every animal hide mask in the region. But the most bizarre blend of devotion and desire occurred in the solitary cells of anchorites, monks walled into tiny chapels by vows of enclosure. These hermits, prized for their extreme penance, survived on a diet of herbs and rainwater, speaking to no one for years. Yet some anchorites began to write love letters on the chapel walls, their quill strokes spidery and desperate. One such hermit, Brother Theobald, reportedly fell madly in love with an image of the Virgin Mary painted above his altar. He carved her name into the plaster, Maria Aeterna Amica Mea, and left a hollowed bone at her feet, believing it could carry his voice to the heavens. When ecclesiastical inspectors opened his chamber decades later, they found the wall fissured with dozens of love inscriptions and the bone stained with tears. The church crushed the relic, fearing a blasphemous conflation of human longing with divine grace. Not all transgressions were penned in secret. In some abbeys, the Festival of the Unveiled Heart, invited monks to offer symbolic tokens of desire at the high altar before Easter. A novice might lay down a carved wooden phallus painted gold. A precentor might place a lock of hair bound with a ribbon dyed with rose petals. The next morning, the abbot revealed these offerings in the refectory, reading their owners' names aloud before the gathered community, an act meant to purge secret lusts through public disclosure. Astonishingly, many monks bowed with gratitude, claiming that the humiliation cleansed their hearts. Yet behind their bowed heads they grinned, knowing that the most scandalous offering, a pair of silk stockings said to belong to a visiting noblewoman, had never been claimed for fear of exposure. Even the confessional, the very heart of contrition, became an unlikely venue for forbidden exchanges. Brothers would queue for hours to confess a litany of minor sins, each one a pretext to hear the intimate voice of the penitent beside them. They memorized the rhythm of heavy breaths and the faint scratch of robe fabric, using these cues to reveal hidden desires. "Forgive me, Father, for I have lusted." And at that moment, the two confessors exchanged a knowing glance through the narrow grille. Of course, if discovered, both faced the most severe censures, but for many, the risk only added spice to their secret sin. Ultimately, this entanglement of sacred vows and sensual impulses reveals a truth as sharp as a monastic ledger knife. The human heart demands what it demands, even when wrapped in scapular and cowl. From stolen scrolls and yew tree assignations to public offerings of forbidden tokens, medieval monks and nuns wove a hidden tapestry of longing beneath their outer robes of piety. And though these chapters may shock, they also testify to a universal paradox, that in the pursuit of holiness, the soul often finds itself tempted by the very flesh it has renounced. In Part 3, we will unveil the scandalous pilgrimage of perverse penitents, where wayward brothers journeyed to sacred shrines seeking absolution, and improbably secret assignations with cloistered sisters along the route. We'll explore the bizarre remedies for love-induced maladies, from powdered marmoset brain tinctures to consecrated rosehip wine, and dive into the confounding statutes that punish deepest longing with both lashes and love charm crafting. Prepare yourself for more hypocrisy, more hidden ecstasies, and more ingenious survival strategies in the cloister's shadowed heart. The forbidden desires of medieval monks are far from spent. By Midsummer's Eve, wayward brothers desperate for absolution would don tattered cloaks and set off on the pilgrimage of perverse penitence, a journey equal parts penance and pleasure quest. Their destination, the hilltop shrine of St. Wilgefortis, patroness of unwanted husbands, whose legend hinged on miraculous beard growth lest she be wed against her will. Along dusty roads lined with hawthorn and hemlock, rogue monks carried iron-bound barrels filled not with holy water, but with confessional cordials, potions of crushed marmoset brain, consecrated rosehip wine, and a dash of monk's own fingernail clippings. One sip promised courage to confess sins of the flesh. 2 sips risked visions of angelic courtiers beckoning beneath pilgrims' mantles. Encounters along the way were both pious and profane. In the forested hollows of the Ardennes, thieves ambushed pilgrims demanding not coin, but their most intimate secret. A half-terrified brother might reveal his lascivious dream of Sister Osana's midnight incense rituals, only to find the brigands guffawing and scribbling his peccadillo onto a birch bark poster for all passers-by to see. Nothing humbles a penitent quite like being poster-shamed for indecent reverie. At nightly way stations, makeshift hostels run by friendly friars, pilgrims found more than straw pallets. Beneath flickering lanterns, itinerant herbalists offered love-sickness salves, poultices of belladonna and St. John's wort wrapped in silk scraps stolen from nuns' habits. Applied to the throat, these salves were said to quell burning desire. Applied too liberally, they induced delirium and passionate proclamations to anyone within earshot. One poor brother, in the throes of delirious devotion, serenaded a milkmaid's cow barn with an impromptu canto to the Virgin, much to the milch cow's apparent confusion and the friar herbalist's hysterical delight. Yet the official church responded with a patchwork of ever stricter statutes. The Statute of the Severed Veil, 1302, mandated that any monk caught scribbling erotic doggerel in the margins of psalms would lose 1 fingertip per verse. A clumsy penitent named Brother Rupert reportedly arrived at his abbot's quarters, -3 fingers, all because he composed Ode to Sister Clemence's silken ear flaps. The abbot kept Rupert's quills as a grisly reminder, a sharpened antique used to impale beetles for study. By 1327, the Council of Constance issued the decree of the dangling scapular. Any friar overheard whispering sweet nothing to a nun under yew trees would have his scapular nailed to the cloister door for a fortnight, exposed to rain, sun, and ravenous jackdaws. A courageous young friar, Brother Giles, defied the warning. He serenaded Sister Helena beneath the branches, only to return at dawn with his scapular shredded into ribbons and a cluster of crow feathers stuck to his tonsure. He shrugged, claiming the birds were merely allies of divine love. As the pilgrimage neared its end, the true test arrived at the shrine itself. Penitents knelt before St. Wilgefortis's carved effigy, her handsome beard jutting defiantly, and recited the litany of confessions. Each avowal of licentious thought required a token: hair from one's tonsure, a scrap of undergarment, or, in extreme cases, a vial of one's own tears mixed with consecrated oil. The shrine priests collected these offerings in a locked reliquary said to pulse with residual desires. Rumor circulated that the reliquary's lid occasionally rattled at night, as if the bottled longings within sought escape. Finally, absolution came in a ceremony as theatrical as any monastery pageant. Kneeling pilgrims faced the high altar, where the abbot brandished the whip of 7 knots. Each knot symbolized a cardinal temptation: gluttony, sloth, greed, wrath, envy, pride, and lust. With measured strikes upon the monk's own back, the pilgrim atoned for sins of the flesh, yet tradition dictated a final secret twist. After the 7th lash, the abbot quietly read a hidden clause that granted the pilgrim one sanctioned indulgence. A hushed murmur, the abbot's kiss, followed, where the abbot pressed a single kiss upon the pilgrim's forehead. Legend says that kiss carried a spark of sanctioned passion, loosening vows long clenched too tight. Thus, the pilgrimage of perverse penitents concluded, hearts lighter but bodies trembling, tongues looser yet souls ostensibly cleansed. In Part 4, the grand finale, will unmask the secret conclave of the Scarlet Habit, a ring of excommunicated monks turned underground matchmakers, and reveal the epic Anatomy of Temptation ritual, where brothers dance with naked revelers to chart the limits of sin itself. Prepare for the most scandalous, self-flagellating, and downright absurd chapter yet, because in the medieval cloister even the final word could be whispered under subversive breath. Beneath the hush of twilight, when the abbey's shadows fuse into one dark mantle, a new order stirs, the clandestine conclave of the Scarlet Habit, comprised of excommunicated monks, defrocked novices, and one legendary abbot who refused to recant an amorous sonnet. This underground brotherhood trades in forbidden rites and secret matchmaking. They meet in abandoned chapels ringed by yew groves, their scarlet-dyed cloaks flaming against the moonlit stone, ready to broker unions that defy both God's law and man's. The conclave's opening ritual is called the Veil of False Repentance. Each member, face concealed by a blood-red hood, kneels before a ruined altar and recites a counterfeit confession, admitting to carnal crimes they never committed. Cloaked in self-incrimination, they burn a slip of parchment in a brass censer, the smoke rising like a vow of solidarity. This spectacle reminds them that absolution without truth is merely another kind of deception, a delicious hypocrisy they've learned to wield. From there, they commence the Pact of the Lover's Ledger. The conclave maintains a leather-bound codex, its pages sewn with iron wire to mask the faint metallic glint of spilled blood. Into this ledger, they inscribe the names of clients, restless monks, cloistered nuns, and any soul seeking solace beyond the abbey walls. With quills dipped in a mixture of ink and consecrated tears, they note each client's desires: the ardor of a strict lay brother for the abbey organist, the widowed prioress longing to taste human breath again, the cellar-bound monk who dreams of women literate enough to read his secret verses. When pen meets parchment, the ink sometimes runs, a symbol the conclave insists that only true longing can awaken the ledger's spirit. Once names are recorded, the conclave dispatches envoys on matches of midnight. Riding cloaked horses along moonlit lanes, these emissaries deliver coded missives, sprigs of night-blooming jasmine for secret assignations under cloister arches, braided strands of deep blue wool for lovers to tie around their wrists to mark kinship, small flasks of musk-laced oil to be anointed behind closed doors. The code changes monthly. One lamb's wool tuft might mean meet at the herb garden, while two blackthorn thorns threaded together signify seek refuge in the crypt. Even the conclave's most seasoned agents sometimes misinterpret the signs, leading to farcical encounters, a bewildered novice stalking hose-tight in the chapter house, or two elderly lay sisters sharing a startled embrace under an empty lavabo. But the conclave's pièce de resistance is the anatomy of temptation ritual, a night-long spectacle of masked dance, voyeuristic trial, and entirely sanctioned sin. In a decommissioned wing of the monastery, the conclave erects makeshift alcoves draped in crimson and violet. At the stroke of midnight, mournful bell chimes echo through the corridors, drawing participants into the great hall where an amphitheater of stone benches awaits. Stage right, the dancers of discord emerge, 6 brothers and 3 priests stripped to loincloths of maroon wool, their bodies painted with charcoal diagrams of muscles, nerves, and pulse points. They begin an undulating choreography, limbs bending and contracting to the hollow beat of an obsidian gong. Spectators watch through peepholes in the alcove walls, their eyes tracing the dancers' sinewy forms as they illustrate the golden path of pleasure, the way a finger stroking the perineum can ignite the sacral nerve, how a brush of the inner wrist can send shivers up the arm, the precise angle at which 2 bodies might wedge together for maximum mutual stimulation. All of this under the flicker of torchlight, where sweat glitters like dew on a morning rose. In the center of the floor stands the pulpit of persuasion, a carved stone lectern repurposed for disrobing. Each volunteer, be it a novice testing his vows or a prioress tasting danger, ascends the pulpit and proclaims her or his deepest carnal fantasy in Latin. The confession is met with muted gasps or low whistles depending on the audience's tastes. Then, guided by a conclave officiant, the volunteer demonstrates that fantasy with the dancers, transforming doctrinal diagrams into living tableau. One memorable enactment involved a monk and a lay sister recreating the eruption of Mount Ecstasy, a kinetic portrayal of volcanic thrust and ebb that left everyone clutching their robes, and perhaps more. Following each demonstration, the onlookers receive favors of the flesh, tokens to take back to cloistered life. These might include vials of spiced almond oil, razor-shaped combs carved from antler for intimate grooming, or fine sashes embroidered with human hair and painted charms to conceal beneath habits. Each favor is sealed with wax stamped by the conclave's emblem, a cruciform dagger entwined with rose vines. As the night wanes, the conclave concludes with the last kiss of the cloister. All participants, masked, hooded, or unveiled, gather around the grand fountain in the courtyard. A single huge censer of frankincense and myrrh burns at its center, smoke spiraling like a beckoning flame. The master of ceremonies, once a bishop's own confessor, steps forward with a silver shell. He scoops a final measure of burning incense and sprinkles it into the fountain, stirring the waters until they steam. Then, in solemn procession, each member of the conclave crosses the courtyard to place a gentle kiss upon the water's surface, a symbolic gesture of tasting both sin and purification. When the final echo fades, the scarlet conclave disperses into the night. Their vows remain unspoken, but the knowledge of necessity endures. To survive the friction of flesh against faith, some men and women created sanctuaries of shadow and laughter, of anatomy and artifice, of collusion and communion. And so, dear listener, we emerge at dawn beyond the monastery gates, faces pale with candle smoke, hearts rich with secret revelations, minds forever imprinted by the dance of devotion and desire. These were the forbidden desires of medieval monks and their hidden allies, a testament that even in the austere stone of cloisters, the human spirit craved poetry, spectacle, and the exquisite brave folly of flesh. May your own passions remain less scandalous, yet never less fervent. Have you ever wondered how medieval couples dodged the grim prospect of an unexpected bundle of joy, without benefit of birth control pills or condoms from the pharmacy? Picture yourself in a dank, timber-framed room, flickering candlelight, casting shadows on rough-hewn walls, while your partner clutches a bitter-tasting concoction of crushed roots and mashed seeds, hoping it'll spare you both another mouth to feed in. A world where infant survival was a roll of the dice. For the next 10 to 15 seconds, imagine the groans, the hurried prayers to obscure saints, and the desperate creativity that turned everyday herbs and stray animal parts into makeshift contraceptives worthy of both mockery and awe. Part 1. Roots, Rites, and Rogue Remedies in the Medieval Bedroom. Our journey begins not in a surgeon's tent, but in the back alleys of medieval apothecaries, where peddlers hawked vials of unpronounceable powders with names like fertilitas fuga or annolate cetus. These were recipes scribbled in Latin by monks more obsessed with plants than piety, drawn from dusty manuscripts that warned, ingest hawthorn blossoms at Eve's end to ward off conception, lest your womb become a vessel for Satan's mischief. Husbands gulped these gruels before midnight tryst, soon discovering that the acidic tang often provoked stomach cramps rivaling labor pains, an ominous rehearsal for the very ordeal they sought to avoid. Meanwhile, women turned to folk wisdom learned in the gossamer glow of hearth fires. Rowan berries, long revered for their protective power, were mashed into poultices and applied externally, a method believed to block the seed's path. Others relied on the root of the silphium plant, imported at great cost from North Africa, prized for its rumored potency in choking the bloom of life. Alas, silphium became so coveted it was harvested to extinction. By the late Middle Ages, its absence forced herbalists to substitute lesser weeds like pennyroyal and tansy, plants that, in the worst cases, caused fatal liver damage or terrifying hallucinations. But herbs were only half the story. Medieval birth prevention thrived on theater and superstition. In some English villages, midwives led moonlit deterrence ceremonies on nights when the moon hung thin as a sickle. Couples circled an oak tree, sacred to old pagan rites, while the midwife chanted verses to obscure deities, sprinkling them with water boiled from rue and wormwood. Those daring enough to join the spiral dance believed it would confuse their bodies' humors, rendering conception impossible. Skeptics, however, pointed out that these rituals often ended with both partners stumbling through muddy fields in the dark. Proof, perhaps, that preventing pregnancy required almost as much struggle as facing it. For those seeking more mechanical solutions, there existed the medieval sheath, crafted from linen soaked in vinegar or olive oil. These primitive condoms were cut to fit and tied with leather thongs. They weren't widely trusted, many broke at the first thrust, and they certainly didn't prevent disease. Yet some records describe disgruntled husbands demanding refunds from local tanners when their love glove failed mid-coitus, leaving them both cursing the craft and pleading for mercy under the same frost-chilled blankets. Then there were the speculative devices, hollowed gourds plugged with wool and treated with salt water, inserted before intercourse to catch the seed. Other inventors proposed pessaries made from sponges soaked in acidic solutions, ideas gleaned from Byzantine medical texts that described rudimentary diaphragms. Unfortunately, without sterilization, these methods invited infection, turning desperate prevention into a gamble more dangerous than childbirth itself. Looming over all these attempts were the Church's edicts. Canon law forbade sins against nature, declaring coitus interruptus and barrier methods equally detestable. Confessions brimmed with penitents fretting over using a false seed catcher, while priests, red-faced behind their pulpits, thundered that any attempt to thwart God's design risked eternal damnation. Still, whispered guides circulated in cloak and dagger fashion. Should your confessor ask, claim you sought relief from the plague of pregnancy, not the vice of concealing birth, advised one surviving fragment of prayer book margin notes. Despite ecclesiastical ire, convents became unexpected centers of contraceptive innovation. Nuns maintained herb gardens brimming with rue, pennyroyal, and dodder vine, plants used in tinctures and teas to suppress fertility. Some sisters even recorded secret compendia of recipes in invisible ink made from lemon juice, their quills scratching furtive annals of childless blessings. It was whispered that novice nuns practiced self-preservation rituals, drinking bitter infusions on their monthly courses to ensure they could complete their vows unhampered by motherhood. Yet perhaps the most astonishing method embraced the body's own cycles. Medieval women tracked their periods with tokens, colored beads strung on threads, to mark days of impurity and presumed low fertility. They believed the moon's womb guided their own, abstaining on certain nights and embracing on others in a dance of mathematics and faith. Some chroniclers mockingly described these calculations as medieval rhythm methods, though accuracy rivaled little more than a blind flick of a lute string. Throughout all these schemes, danger lurked in the margins. Pennyroyal oil, once ingested, could induce uterine contractions fierce enough to cause hemorrhage or even death. Women wary of such lethal risks sometimes resorted to the priciest contrivance, coitus interruptus, trusting husbands to pull out just in time. Yet stories abound of miscalculations that led to hasty pilgrimages to far-off shrines, where couples prayed for divine mercy and relief from burgeoning bellies. Still, for many medieval families, the choice was not between methods but between endurance and tragedy. Infant mortality rates hovered near 50%, yet the prospect of more mouths to feed meant more hands for labor. In agrarian households, children were assets until they weren't, an economic calculus that twisted prevention into a moral and material dilemma. The poorest, with no midwife or herbalist to consult, relied on old wives' tales, to lie on cold stones post-coitus, or to swallow a piece of earthenware night soil, advice that, more often than not, sent them to their graves rather than sparing them. Childbirth. By candles' flicker and dawn's dim glow, medieval people had woven a tapestry of contraceptive lore, roots and rites, potions and poultices, devices crude and dainty. Their inventions were born of necessity, tinged with hope and horror in equal measure. And as you lie in your comfortable modern bed, consider the lengths to which those long-ago lovers went, armed with hawthorn, hemp, and heresy, to evade the specter of an unwanted child. In Part 2, we'll journey into the world of emergent surgeries, folk charms that danced on the edge of witchcraft, and the clandestine codes used by lovers to signal when to hold fast and when to yield the field. Trust me, the next chapter of this contraceptive odyssey is as wild and wrenching as any medieval miracle or misadventure. In the dingy backrooms of medieval apothecaries, where rats scurried beneath broken floorboards and the air smelled of vinegar and old parchment, a different kind of commerce thrived, the trade in protective charms against pregnancy. Lovers who'd suffered through the bitter teas and pungent poultices of Part 1 now sought something less gastrointestinal. They turned instead to amulets, tiny reliquaries hung around the waist or sewn into linen shifts, each inscribed with cryptic formulas meant to confuse or repel the seed before it took root. One favorite was the chalice of chastity pendant, a small silver cup barely large enough to hold a drop of oil. To activate its power, a woman filled the chalice with the morning dew collected from churchyard gravestones, a macabre nod to death's cold grip, then added 1 pinch of pulverized shell, ostensibly the crushed remains of pilgrims' rosary beads. She wore this dew and shell slurry against her lower abdomen for 3 sunrises, trusting that the chill of the grave's moisture and the sacred aura of crushed pilgrimage would render her womb inhospitable. Records lament that many brides arrived at their wedding night, shivering, caked in ghost-white sediment, praying fervently that their husbands would think it an obscure fertility ritual, rather than an ill-timed bath. Another popular talisman came in the form of the lily-of-the-valley knot. Midwives braided a length of copper wire into the likeness of a delicate flower, then coated it in a green enamel made from copper sulfate and crushed vinegar flies. Couples tied the knot around the man's phallus before intercourse, ostensibly to distract the seed with its bitter metallic kiss. In practice, the knot frequently loosened or broke off mid-thrust, lodging itself in soft tissue and sending both partners scuttling into the darkness to fish for copper fragments. Surgeons' logs from Montpellier recount at least one grisly case where a suitor's withdrawal of the knot required rudimentary forceps and the squeamish assistance of 3 assistants. For those unconvinced by physical charms, the medieval mind offered abbreviated anatomy charms, texts rather than trinkets. Lovers procured miniature illustrated scrolls depicting the male and female reproductive organs with certain parts blacked out or annotated with marginal glosses in red ink. Do not enter here, turn back now, or proceed at your own peril. According to the manuscript's preface, the annotated women's anatomy was drawn from the secret lectures of a Moorish physician who had seen too much, while the male diagrams claimed to originate from a lost Alexandrian papyrus. Couples read these diagrams together by candlelight, tracing forbidden zones with their fingertips, equal parts education and foreplay, as though the threat of divine displeasure could somehow function as a physical barrier. The Church, ever watchful, denounced these obscure texts as heretical. In 1324, The Council of Lion ordered all anatomical abominations burned in public squares, torches blazing while onlookers jeered the furious fantasies of flesh. Priests then forced convicted sellers to march through town wearing pointed paper, hats inscribed with anatomical sketches, an ironic punishment that broadcast their own knowledge of reproductive detail far and wide. Beyond charms and charts, medieval folk magic embraced the ritual of the false menstruum. Women desperate to convince husbands they were in their menstrual impurity, and therefore infertile, took to wearing daubed linens dyed a deep red with madder root and iron filings. They would feign bleeding by untying and discreetly staining the loincloth after intercourse, then retreat to privies for dramatic staging of crimson runoff. When husbands discovered the ruse, they often responded with shock and fury, both at being deceived and at the prospect of repeating the entire charade should family pressure mount again. But perhaps the most audacious folk remedy involved the Eye of the Bat potion. Bats, long associated with nocturnal mysteries and liminal thresholds, were thought to embody the ability to slip unseen into tight spaces, an apt metaphor for thwarting conception. Ingredient lists varied by region, but one popular recipe called for a fresh bat's eyeball, a sprig of mandrake root, and 3 strands of a cuckold's beard hair, all steeped overnight in old ale by a blacksmith's forge. The resulting brew, served lukewarm, promised to render a man's seed as blind as the bat's, preventing it from seeking the hidden womb. Misadventures abounded. Many found the potion foul and vomit-inducing, while at least 2 chroniclers swore it caused temporary night blindness, a side effect no medieval lover could afford. Amid these cottage industry cures, some towns developed clandestine networks of contraceptive confraternities. In Paris, certain street urchins acted as couriers for recipes and talismans, slipping through alleys at dawn to trade charms between consorts. Membership required an oath whispered over a chipped chalice of mulled wine and the sharing of a single intimate secret. Their motto, scrawled on hidden courtyard walls in charcoal, trumpeted, "He who binds the flesh shall unbind the fate." Despite repeated crackdowns by city watchmen, the confraternities thrived, morphing into proto-midwives who mixed flower essences, with prayers to obscure saints like Saint Radigan, patroness of conjugal peace. However ingenious these talismans, the sharpest minds of the era turned to early surgical interventions. Surgeons in Bologna began experimenting with female sterilization, rudimentary as it was. Records from 1367 describe a doctor, Pietro Cane, who claimed to have cauterized uterine passages with a hot iron rod guided through the cervix, ensuring no child may be born of that womb henceforward. The procedure, performed without anesthesia or proper antisepsis, often resulted in septic fever or outright death. Cane's own notes, charred at the edges by repeated use of heated tools, warn any successor. Proceed with God's fear, for one misstep leads to hell's door. Looming over every household's contraceptive gambit was the moral hazard of confession. Parish registers from Aquitaine overflow with pleas for absolution, each beginning, "Forgive me, Father, for I have employed deadly herbs," to which priests often responded with penances like fasting or undertaking pilgrimages. Some penitents traded the lengths of their penance, a week of prayer for rue-infused tea, 30 Hail Marys for a silver-coated gourd pessary. In the confessional's dim light, even the most dogmatic cleric learned the intimate details of folk birth control, smirking behind his screen as he scribbled penances that doubled as veiled nods to herbal lore. By the time dawn cracked across moss-covered rooftops, medieval people had piled up an absurd arsenal of charms, charts, cocktails, and crude surgery, all in service of evading pregnancy. Many methods bordered on theater, others on torture, and some squarely on the brink of witchcraft. Yet through trial and tragic error, countless couples navigated their fragile lives with a mixture of hope, fear, and biting humor. In Part 3, we'll descend into the clandestine world of witch trials, where alleged seed witches face stakes both literal and figurative. We'll dive into the hidden rituals of royal courts, where queens employed secret entourages of apothecaries to protect sovereign bloodlines, and will reveal the most grotesque family planning device of the era, the regal spindle, rumored to snuff out fertility through whispered courtly intrigue. The contraceptive odyssey of medieval Europe grows ever stranger. Stay tuned. The crackle of flames in a village square, the stench of burning brimstone, and the terrified cry of a woman accused of meddling with men's seed. Welcome to the witch trials of medieval Europe, where birth control wasn't just heresy, it was diabolical sorcery. Meanwhile, in gilded royal chambers, queens marshaled secret networks of apothecaries to guard dynastic lines, and rumor whispered of a device so clandestine it could only exist behind locked doors, the regal spindle. Strap in, dear viewer, for part 3 of our contraceptive odyssey, where fear, power, and the darkest absurdities of human survival intertwine. The seed witch hunts. When a peasant couple suffered repeated failures in childbirth, or an entire litter of stillborn lambs, superstition pointed to a sinister culprit, the seed witch. These hapless women, often midwives or herbalists with reputations for healing, found themselves hauled before justice under the statutes of nocturnal mischief. Accusations ran from stealing a man's potent essence in the dead of night to concocting potions that blinded the seed before it could take root. Trials began with the dreaded trial by swallow. The accused would be forced to ingest a bitter liquid made of rue, hemlock, and pulverized eyebright under the watchful gaze of clerics. If she vomited, well, that proved innocence because only an innocent body could expel the sacred formula. If she held it down, she was deemed guilty of demonic pact and sentenced to public execution. In one notorious case in 1432, Mother Agnes of Bossey held down her cup for 3 days, only to be discovered dehydrated and hanged anyway, lest her survival undermine the court's authority. Even more macabre was the bind and burn ritual. The accused would be tied to a stake and given a single hour to deliver a child. Proof, the inquisitors claimed, that she had been using charms rather than God's mercy. Of course, most seed witches were beyond childbearing age, but logic was a casualty of hysteria. Those who failed this absurd ordeal were then literally burned at the stake, their ashes scattered beneath thorn hedges to ward off further devilry. Secret royal contraceptive courts. While villagers cowered in terror of seed witches, royal courts embraced a subtler art. Queens, faced with the dilemma of producing heirs yet avoiding too many mouths at the banquet table, employed hidden retinues of court apothecaries. These discreet pharmacists worked within an unspoken code, concoct fertility suppressants strong enough to delay pregnancy for a year or two, yet gentle enough to avoid assassination by arsenic. Court records from Isabella of Castile's reign hint at a chamber of quietus, a locked cabinet containing remedies distilled from silphium substitutes, poppy essences, and carefully measured doses of laxative almond oil. One extant invoice lists 5 drachms of Swiss stonecrop, 2 of bishop's weed, and 1 blessed relic of Saint Genevieve, presumably dropped into a nightly draught. The Queen's ladies-in-waiting administered these tonics under the cover of whispered prayers, their spoons clinking softly in chamber pots long after midnight. In England, Henry VIII's wives consulted cold translations of Greek medical texts smuggled through Calais. Anne Boleyn's private physician, Dr. Nicholas Sander, kept a journal of moon-calibrated tinctures administered during court masques and hunting parties. Aristocrats joked that the gloved lady standing just behind the Queen at the tilt-yard was less an attendant than a secret dispenser of almond-infused oils, her true charge to preserve the Tudor line without overpopulating Greenwich. Meanwhile, in France, Catherine de Medici's Italian surgeons experimented with early cervical plugs, made of beeswax and rose oil. These were inserted during the 5 days following persuasion, as the French euphemized intercourse, then removed with a twig of yew dipped in holy water. One physician proudly logged 0 court pregnancies in a 6-month span, but he neglected to note that 2 ladies-in-waiting suffered mysterious bouts of hysteria, and one duke complained of excruciating anal pain from a misfired yew twig. The regal spindle, conspiracy or reality? Amid these royal intrigues, legend grew of a device so arcane it earned the sobriquet regal spindle. Supposedly devised in 1374 by an alchemist at the court of Emperor Charles IV, the spindle was a hollow silver rod little more than a finger's breadth in diameter, engraved with astrological glyphs, inserted post-coitus into the woman's cervix, its tip exuding a fine spray of silver nitrate. It was said to coagulate seminal moisture on contact. The procedure, performed blind and without anesthesia, required incomparable nerve from both surgeon and patient. Few dared speak of the regal spindle outside hushed corridors. One surviving letter from a disgraced duke's nursemaid describes smuggling an empty spindle in her corset during her mistress's pregnancy scare, and being nearly executed when it rattled against a chamber pot lid. By the mid-15th century, rumors held that successive emperors confiscated these devices as state secrets, storing them in vaults alongside crown jewels, only to have them melt away in the sulfur fumes of invading armies. Superstition shrouded the spindle in mystical feats. Some claimed it needed to be charged by the northern star on solstice nights. Others insisted it only worked if the woman had swallowed 3 seeds of mandrake under a waning moon. Apocryphal testimonies even suggest that spindle-wielding surgeons carried tiny brass bells, ringing them to ward off jealous spirits as they navigated the woman's inner sanctum. Survival, sacrifice, and scandal. Across Europe, these high and low-born tactics shared a common thread: the desperate lengths to which people went to manage fertility in a world without safe recourse. Village midwives risked their lives teaching herbal lore. Noble women traded dignity for clandestine meetings in palace turrets. Even emperors waged quiet wars over the secrets of a woman's womb. But some paid the ultimate price. When court apothecaries fell out of favor, they were accused of witchcraft and tortured in prison dungeons for recipes they had long since burned. Bartered manuscripts of contraceptive poetry, rhymed curses intended to shut down wombs, survived only in fragments hidden in monks' manuscripts, later unearthed by scandalized clerics who denounced them as the darkest filth. By Candle's Dying Glow, Part 3 draws to a close, a panorama of terrified witches, embattled queens, and alchemical contraptions locked away in imperial vaults. Next, in our grand finale, we'll peer into the Renaissance laboratories where surgeons refine sterilization, unveil the gypsy herb women whose stock and trade defied both pagan and papal censure, and tell the shockingly modern story of early condom, patents that fizzled under the weight of clerical protest. The history of medieval birth prevention remains a tapestry of ingenuity, horror, and stubborn hope, one that demands one final curtain call: stay tuned. Imagine stepping into a candlelit chamber thick with the metallic scent of heated steel and aromatic herbs, where 2 robed surgeons argue over whether to cauterize or clamp, while beyond the oaken door, a gypsy caravan rumbles in with hidden pouches of moon-dried seeds that promise childless nights. Welcome to the dawn of modern birth prevention, where desperation met invention head-on, and the stakes were nothing less than life, liberty, and the freedom to choose one's own crib, or to avoid it altogether. Part 4: Renaissance Labs, Gypsy Herb Women, and the Rise and Fall of Early Condoms. By the late 15th century, European surgeons began to apply Renaissance curiosity to anatomy with a clinical eye, yet often backed by medieval superstition. In Padua's famed teaching hospital, Dr. Lorenzo de Ferrara pioneered what he called the uterine passage cautery. He drafted his treatise in florid humanist Latin, complete with detailed woodcuts, a slender metal probe heated in a brazier, then inserted through the cervix to scorch, internal lining. Ferrara boasted of 5 sterile outcomes in his first dozen patients, though entries in his ledger hint at sepsis and hysteria rather than relief. Students flocked to witness his lectures, both horrified and fascinated, as he insisted sterilization was simply art applied to nature's embarrassment. Not far from Padua, in the laboratories of Florence, apothecary chemist Alessandra di Mercato experimented with chemical repellents. Her Florentine varnish combined oil of cedar, alum, and a tincture of rue, distilled under a full moon to maximize potency. Applied as a thin film to folded linen, what she termed a proto-diaphragm, it repelled not only seed, but, she claimed, nocturnal demons favoring impurity. Alessandra's recipe passed by word of mouth through court circles. Some praised its effectiveness, while rival chemists decried it as witch's varnish, leading to her brief imprisonment on charges of necromancy. Outside these urban centers, itinerant gypsy herb women carried far more effective and far more affordable cures. Traveling from Black Forest to Brittany, they traded charms and tinctures among peasant markets. Their signature remedy, Knight's Veil Elixir, blended crushed elderberries, seeds of agrimony, and a whisper of mandrake. Harvested by the light of a waning moon and sung to sleep with a lilting lullaby. Women drank the brew before dawn. Many swore by its mild effects, but others reported hallucinatory dreams of dancing foxfires and spectral midwives, a side effect they accepted as payment for reprieve. It was in Antwerp in 1515 that the first known waterproof sheath appeared in printing. A pamphlet by a Dutch physician named Jan van der Meersch described a linen condom coated within by boiled fish bladder and secured with a silver ring. He claimed it prevented not only children, but also the common pox spreading through the docks. Local leather workers, sensing profit, began crafting reusable sheaths from fine goatskin, stamped with a maker's mark and sold under the Latin slogan Sic vita non crescit, thus life does not grow. Unfortunately, shipment by canal was slow, and many packages arrived warped or mildewed, a fact that did little to deter aristocratic demand, but plenty to fuel noble complaints of foul odors and brittle textures. Church authorities responded with outrage. In 1523, the Archbishop of Cologne delivered a thundering sermon condemning these devilish gourds of deceit, declaring any man who used them an accomplice to impurity. He ordered the confiscation and burning of all recorded condom pamphlets, publicly branding the practice sinful sheathcraft. Yet underground workshops continued to supply clandestine orders, their goods passing from hand to hand in coded verse. Seek the coat of fish within the tube of linen, lest your lords multiply as sul, toads in the night. Meanwhile, the gypsy herb women faced their own trials. In 1538, a Hungarian landowner accused a Romani healer named Zorka of poisoning his steward with a fertility-blocking tea. Zorka was arrested and tried in Buda, where she eloquently defended her practice as the same art of midwives and monks, citing ancient Greek and Arabic sources. Though spared execution, likely thanks to a bribe in gold ducats, she was banished and her caravan supplies consigned to the flames, scattering her secrets into smoke and rumor. In academic circles, humanist scholars began to question the morality of outright prevention. The University of Salamanca hosted a heated debate in 1546. Theologians argued that any barrier was a venial sin at best, while jurists declared it a criminal act against the state, depriving the realm of future soldiers and taxpayers. One spirited student, Miguel de Estuardo, penned a satirical play in which a field of naked soldiers lamented they had no children to inherit their armor, a biting indictment of enforced sterility. The play was quickly banned, but performances continued in secret courtyards, drawing laughter and furtive applause. By the close of the century, surgical sterilization techniques had made only marginal advances. Some surgeons attempted oviduct ligation with tight silk threads, but sepsis remained rampant and patient survival neither guaranteed nor sought. Conversely, herbal tinctures refined by apothecaries grew in sophistication. Mercury-free recipes for male tonics that reduced virility, balanced against profiles of nausea and skin rash so severe that some men joked they'd rather father a dozen heirs than endure the cure. Yet the most astonishing and strangely modern development came in 1575, with the first patented condom in England. Nathaniel Filmer, a London glove maker, secured a royal patent for plague-proof linen covers designed for soldiers quartered in London's marshes. His design, knitted to the exact gauge of the male phallus and treated with turpentine to repel vermin, promised dual protection against disease in children. Filmer's patent survived for 7 years, until the Privy Council, under pressure from the Bishop of London, revoked it as contrary to the good of posterity. Filmer's factory closed, and his remaining stock was quietly sold off in alehouses at steep discount to John Donne's circle of poet soldiers, who prized them as both curio and coitus accessory. As dawn breaks on this long odyssey, we see that medieval and Renaissance contraceptive history is neither straightforward triumph nor unbroken tragedy. It is a tapestry woven with whispered spells, heated steel, bitter draughts, and dashed hopes, an enduring testament to human resilience in the face of biology's relentless march. From Ferrara's cautery to Filmer's patent, from gypsy elixirs to royal clandestine cabinets, people invented, tinkered, prayed, and suffered, all to control the very meaning of life. So when you reach for a modern pill, patch, or barrier, remember the centuries of trial, terror, and tenacity that brought us here. And next time your smartphone signals fertility, or your doctor prescribes a prescription, spare a thought for Alessandra in Florence, Zorka by the Danube, and the courageous, if foolhardy, couples who gamble their lives for a moment's reprieve. History's most absurd birth control methods remind us that where there's love, there's always a way, no matter how strange or uncomfortable